I think I'm standing between all of you and your lunch as well at this stage, which is I'm also conscious of. Let me just move on and talk very briefly around how public procurement is changing in Ireland. I'll move through that reasonably quickly, give you a sense of what the new operating model for procurement is going to be and what that will look like, and particularly talk about construction developments and our element of Construction 2020. The public procurement reform programme was commenced under the overall reform programme of government when the new government came into power, and set out a fairly ambitious programme to look at the 8.5 billion euros we spend each and every year on goods and services. In addition to that 8.5 million of current spending, there's about another 3 billion of capital. So it's a very significant spend each and every day of the year in terms of what the state spends its money on. Within that context, there's about somewhere north of about 500 million in minor works as well, in addition, so which would be of interest to this audience. So I've come on board to try and bring together the various different wings of state to work together under a new and different model, and also to bring together the policy and the operations areas in a more joined up kind of model. We're looking to deliver fairly substantial savings, so we're going to make sure that there is better tendering of works and that we deliver better value for money to the state. And we're looking to deliver savings of the order of about 500 million over 3 years. And in this year, we're targeting 127 million. The existing model, as most people are very aware of, is a very fragmented procurement model. Each of the, say for example, if you look at the local government sector, there are about 34 main local authorities out there who largely procure independently of each other, with some exceptions where they collaborate on things like plant hire. When you look into education, when you look into health, again, a lot of independent action. And we're all, in the end of the day, addressing the same markets. So the government decided back in late 2012 that we needed to centralise more. We need to make sure there's better standardisation of how we do our business, to make sure that we align policy and operations better, and professionalise and modernise procurement, because we do have people within the system who, through no fault of their own, may not be fully up to speed with procurement directives, etc. So part around this new endeavour is to make sure that the people who face into the markets, who face into the supply market, know procurement inside out and upside down and are fully aware of it. The new operating model looks like this. So we have a new Office of Government Procurement, which has been set up, and in terms of our recruitment process, towards the back end of this year, the structure will be largely in place. That will focus in on the common goods and services that the government buys and the public service buys. But we will retain 4 large sectoral procurement organisations in health, defence, local government and education. But this will put in place a one voice principle to the marketplace. So rather than buying cleaning or catering independently of each other, we'll buy cleaning and catering from one location in the centre. In terms of buying health equipment, that will be bought in health alone. So the health equipment that say the defence forces or the justice sector need, they will be bought by health. Critically, local government will lead in relation to minor works. So they're developing their capability and they're staffing up a new procurement centre down in Kerry, which many of you would already be aware of, which will take a lead in relation to the procurement of minor works. In terms of the categories, you can see on the left-hand side, and I won't go through it in any great detail, the common goods and services which the Office of Government Procurement will procure. And then you can see the sector-led categories on the right, which are, again, there's 8 in each on the left and 8 on the right, which sets out who's going to buy what in the model going forward. We're very conscious though that the economy is made of a lot of SMEs, and we want to make sure that by looking at goods and services centrally, that we don't drive simple aggregation into the model, because that will squeeze out smaller suppliers. We're very conscious that the CIF has a lot of smaller businesses that are members as well. And in that context, we've set up a working group to engage with various industry bodies to make sure that our plans and our policies align with the structures that are there. And we've an SME working group which is chaired by the OGP, but involves members including the CIF, ISME, IBEC, Small Firms Association, etc. We want to make sure that those policies that we roll out align with the market structures, and that's very important. In April of this year, we launched a new circular which provides guidance and regulation to public buyers about how they do their business, and in particularly looking at SMEs and making sure that SMEs can compete and have the opportunity to compete. So what it did was it did things like lower turnover requirements in the marketplace. It lowered and looked at, gave sensible guidance in relation to insurance. These are all things that are barriers for suppliers when they're trying to bid on projects. In terms of increasing transparency, we've set guidance that public bodies should tender any works in excess of 25,000 and that those tenders would go up on the national tendering platform. We also want to make sure that people and contracting authorities break down larger projects into smaller lots, again to give people the opportunity to bid for smaller works. In addition to that, we want to ensure that we build awareness and education and training within the supplier community as well. And we're working very heavily with Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation, Intertrade Ireland and Enterprise Ireland to promote awareness. And we do have Meet the Buyer events, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the Go to Tender programme, which gives people who want to bid for public sector works the opportunity and the education to understand how public procurement works and enable them to bid on individual projects. So these are good training programs and heavily supported by the Office of Government Procurement. We will increasingly this year standardise our documentation as well. One of the pieces of feedback I've had from various different suppliers has been the fact that it's quite difficult to work with the suite of documents that are out there because they can be inconsistent as you look across the various different wings of state. So this year and into next year, we're going to standardise our documentation much more so. And finally, we're working on the transposing of the new EU procurement directives, which need to be in place by mid-2016. But we intend to have them in place, certainly the revisions to the classical directives, updated by the middle of 2015. We've already introduced and accelerated some of the measures, though, in relation to by the introduction of Circular 1014. So it has brought forward some of the guidance from the directives and pushed that out there now for public procurers to implement. Coming back to the Meet the Buyer events and Go to Tender, I'd like to run a small video if the AV team could do it, just to give you a sense of what that's about, and also how the people who are going on those training programs react to it. So if we're good to go.
The new Office of Government Procurement is a major step forward in reforming the way we do procurement in this country. We want to have a centralised approach where there is one hub, one place that you can actually contact in relation to procurement queries. This will deliver a more consistent service, a better application of rules, a better understanding of procurement both for the client and indeed for the purchaser.
The current structures of procurement are very fragmented or broken up over many different public service bodies. They're buying from the markets independently of each other and obviously not getting the best value in that context. So what the new Office of Government Procurement will do will be to engage and buy from the markets just once. So no longer multiple conversations, just one conversation with our suppliers, and that will deliver better value for the taxpayer.
For a number of years now, I've worked with Intertrade Ireland on these Go to Tender events and the Meet the Buyer events to produce a platform for buyers to meet the suppliers, and it's been very successful to date.
We need to really tailor our audience a bit more. We need to go meet people, we need to get more information, we need to get out there and sell ourselves a bit more. It's really important to come to a course like this because you better understand, I suppose, the process of what's going on and what way buyers are thinking and what they're looking for. A lot of it I wasn't aware of, but certainly I am now. The government recognises that the SMEs are sort of the backbone of the economy now. So I think it's very important that a lot of the smaller type businesses pitch for this government business, because if we win it, we're going to grow very big. It's going to benefit everybody.
If you're a good company and you've got good offerings, but I think you're in a good position to ultimately enter the race, where before you might be sitting on the outside and you're trying to grow. So I think it's very positive.
People in SMEs will want to know that the office is there for their benefit, to help them, and in that context they do workshops, they do seminars, and their website is superb.
Competing for business in Ireland in public procurement is pretty much the same as competing for business in public procurement anywhere within Europe, because we all follow the same rules and regulations. It's European-wide rules and regulations. So businesses that win here, and we have some examples of that, can go on to win business in Europe as well.
The Irish state is spending about €23 million a day, leaving aside capital and infrastructure just on purchasing goods and services. So it's only right that we have a proper, robust system in place, a system that is easy for both the buyer and easy for the client as well.
Okay, thanks for that. It gives you a sense of what we're doing, and we would strongly encourage, again, businesses that are maybe not familiar with public procurement to, either go to the Meet the Buyer events, which are coming up later on in the year, or actually go on some of the training tendering courses. They're very reasonably priced, and it gives people a very good insight into public procurement. And those who go on those courses actually proportionately win more business. So it's certainly it's worth engaging in. Let me move on to talk a little bit about the policy side and construction developments. Obviously, most of you are well aware that there are procurement actions in Construction 2020. There are procurement actions in the Action Plan for Jobs. So we work very closely with our colleagues in other departments and agencies to make sure that we are looking to align our developments. Obviously, the construction sector is no stranger to changes in legislation, and the efficiencies this can enable and drive are very welcome, particularly if it improves overall efficiency of delivery, but also standards for our customers, both on the residential side, but obviously on the state side as well. As part of our work, we're currently in the middle of the review of the public works contracts that commenced in January of this year, and we've had quite a number of submissions from various different stakeholder bodies, including the CIF. We've gone on a journey now of collecting data as well. So in May of this year, we launched a website to give participants, both clients and suppliers within the marketplace, the ability to actually give us information and data in relation to their experience of working with the public works contracts and the consequences of working with the public works contracts. So that data that data has been collected. I must say we've had a very mixed response in relation to people providing that information. So we may need to look at other mechanisms to provide data. We've had very limited responses, how I'd put it. But notwithstanding that, we have a series of recommendations that we want to make to the Minister, and that report is working its way through the governance arrangements. But I would be hopeful that in the next number of weeks we'll be able to make some announcements with regard to recommendations from the review of the public works contracts. In addition, we've had the Construction Contracts Act of 2013, and there are two key elements to that, one of which is completed, and that's the first one mentioned here, which is the Code of Practice for the conduct of the adjudication. So a final draft of that has been circulated to all parties involved in that in those discussions. And the second element of that, which is the appointment of a ministerial panel for adjudication, is the work in relation to that appointment is well underway, and we'll be commencing shortly a publication of requests for submissions of interest. So we want we need to ensure that we get high calibre adjudicators appointed to that panel. So that will be in an open and transparent process that will be conducted through the Public Appointment Service, and we hope to commence that soon. Once the panel is put in place and we have a chairman appointed, the Act will be commenced. And Minister Harris has given an indication to all that we expect that the commencement will take place sometime in spring of 2015. Let me move on and talk a little bit about the public capital programme. Many of you are well aware that there is a review of the Exchequer capital programme well underway and will be shortly concluded. The new programme then will set out the government's capital expenditure commitments over the next number of years. And while we've seen obviously very welcome recent statistics from the CSO and revenue in relation to the improvements in the economy, it's important to realise that we're still quite constrained with regard to capital expenditure under the existing obligations on the Stability and Growth Pact and the so-called six-pack. The capital programme, though, has averaged an investment of approximately 3.4 billion euros per annum since 2012, and approximately an estimated 75% of that has gone on construction projects. The stimulus package as well has contributed an additional spend of approximately 2.25 billion, and that's been very welcome in relation to its contribution to jobs. Let me move on and talk a little bit about capacity of the industry. Obviously, government has welcomed the signs in the recovery in the construction space, and we've seen increase in demands right across the full portfolio, from commercial right through to residential, and we see what that's doing as well with regards to pricing. It is important that the industry is in a position to react and build capacity to ensure that we don't end up with another bubble. And Brendan mentioned some of this in his earlier conversation. In that context, we want to make sure that that capacity is there within the industry, and it's not simply financial. We also want to make sure that there are skills in the marketplace that are there to react and provide capacity on the supply side as well, to make sure that you don't end up with substantial inflation in the marketplace. So there are a number of capacity issues. Finance is obviously one that is of significant concern to us. And in that context, we need to make sure that as inflationary pressures start to bite and as business starts to recover, that the supply side, the industry has the financial capacity to be able to meet that. As many of you are aware, the current guidelines in relation to public procurement typically look at turnover as a measure of financial capacity, and we believe that's not an appropriate mechanism going forward, particularly given the pressure that has been put on balance sheets. So in that context, it is our intention to introduce some new measures for the public sector in relation to being in a position to assess financial capacity, and that would take into account the balance sheets in particular. We're very conscious, though, that not every business produces audited accounts, so we'll be looking to look beyond simply audited accounts, and also to work with contracting authorities who may not have the financial expertise. So we want to make sure that those measures are comprehensive but also simple to implement and execute. We believe that this will become a much more reliable mechanism to assess financial capacity in the markets going forward. Finally, let me talk a little bit about performance bonds. Still, performance bonds remain, whether it's right or wrong, is seen as a key measure of the ability of a contractor to secure credit in the marketplace. And it's pretty much a vote of confidence, and it's assessed as that in that regard. But the market, as we know, constrained hugely, and the run-up to the end of 2012, it became quite dysfunctional, and was very, very difficult for contractors to secure adequate performance bonds as sureties were, had increasing losses. So we made some changes with regard to the guidance, and in May 2013 introduced new changes that lowered the level of bonds that we required contracting authorities to put in place. And we believe that has helped and eased the market somewhat. In other regards, we do intend to publish guidance as well with regard to the ability to enable contracting authorities to put in place replacement contractors in the unfortunate situation of an insolvency. At this moment in time, it's very difficult for public contracting authorities to replace a contractor when there has been an insolvency, and it causes significant delay and cost to all parties involved if a procurement has to be effectively restarted from scratch. So the new procurement directives do enable and give guidance in relation to replacement contractors, and so it is our intention later on this year to publish some guidance in relation to replacement contractors. Let me move on and talk a little bit about life cycle costing. The new procurement directives talk a lot about sustainable procurement, and an element of that is around life cycle costing and looking at total cost of ownership. And so it's our intention that this year we will introduce as soon as possible, introduce a life cycle costing metric as part of risk management, so that we can start to build that understanding of life cycle costing into the public procurement processes. That may lead subsequently into the introduction of life cycle costing as a quality criteria in assessing a most economically advantageous tender process. So we're starting to look at that, and it would be our intention to work and set up a group as to how we would do that, and work particularly with all interested parties, including the CIF in that group. As people are aware, the building control regulations kicked in March of 2014, and the Office of Government Procurement introduced guidance to contracting authorities in March in relation to that, and have since made changes to our main contracts to enable that. We also welcome the introduction of the concept of a statutory register, building upon the work that the CIF has done on a voluntary basis in relation to in relation to a register. And we're working closely with our colleagues in the Department of Environment, Community and Local Government to look and see how we can actually use the enrolment in such a statutory register as a precondition of award for a public contract. We need to get to a point where a statutory register is meaningful. The final point you'll be glad to hear, in relation to the EU directives then, we are working to transpose the EU directives. We've already gone through one round of consultation. There are a number of aspects in the EU directives that are of interest in the construction space. I've already mentioned life cycle costing, but also a greater focus on social aspects and environmental aspects. We are looking at and have set up a separate group in relation to social clauses. It's an internal group at looking at promoting and driving more social clauses into contracts so as we gain more experience and understanding of their implications. And I see Michael Hand here from Grange Gorman, who've done great work in championing social clauses early on behalf of the state. But other things within the EU directives include things like performance evaluation, obligations in relation to breaking contracts into lots, electronic procurement for construction, etc. We will be going through another round of consultation probably towards the end of this month or early into next month, and we'd welcome further engagement from industry in relation to the transposition of those directives, because it'll move on fairly quickly from there. So in summary, there is a lot happening within the public procurement regime. It is very much a sea change to what has happened beforehand, and will be a significant enabler in terms of us reducing the deficit and staying on track with that 3% number. It will also help us modernise and professionalise procurement and how it's done and delivered within the state. And significantly, it'll deliver value for money for the taxpayer and the ratepayer, which are very, very important increasingly. But also there are a range of legislative and policy developments which are well underway, and we look forward to continuing to work very closely with the CIF in relation to those developments. So I'd like to thank you for your time.